system are the existing stakeholders, and they are terrified of letting go of that existing system. And that existing system has served them well for a long time. They had a lot of money, the gas tax kept being increased, or you had VMT going up, and they had plenty of money to play with. They were very happy. A lot of people got nice second homes with all that money. But actually, if you look at how the rest of the world funds their transportation system, nobody has this structure. Nobody else dedicates gas taxes to a trust fund that they then use to fund their nation's transportation system. It doesn't happen. They have much higher gas taxes than we do, but they don't use that money for transportation. The two things are not linked. And as a result, they're able to use the money that they have for transportation based on where the best investments would be. They're not fighting over who got how much money, because the money is all coming from the general treasury. It's not coming from individual states being tracked by gas taxes. They're not fighting over which mode gets how much, because they don't have this whole user pay argument. Anytime you try to take gas tax money and use it on transit, the highway guys and the truckers will scream bloody murder, because you're taking our money and you're putting it into transit. Well, you don't have that problem with general revenues, because general revenues are coming from income taxes and other funds. No one's sitting there saying, oh, it's a user fee, I get it back. So the move to general funds, while it's terrifying to the existing stakeholders, is not such a bad thing. We're already doing it. We may have no other choice but to do it anyway, and it's how the rest of the world does things. Now, the trade-off is that there are two big objections that are raised that are somewhat legitimate. One, contract authority. For those who don't know what contract authority is, it is that what these long-term authorization bills do is they say, we're going to give you money into the future so you can make long-term planning decisions for your transportation. Right? Makes a lot of sense. You don't want to have year-to-year appropriations for transportation because they're long-term investments. They need multi-year funding. But now we have a 2-year bill, not a 6-year bill. Congress couldn't come up with enough money for a 6-year bill. That's why we have a 2-year bill. So contract authority isn't as relevant. And secondly, you don't need to have contract authority from a trust fund structure. You could have some other version of it through the general fund. Somehow all these other countries manage to fund long-term transportation projects without a highway trust fund structure. And secondly is the idea that it's dedicated. Everybody in transportation who is used to getting this money is terrified that what this means is if it comes from general fund revenues, we're going to be competing with all the other domestic priorities. And we all know that transportation gets killed when it competes with other domestic priorities. We're not coming in ahead of defense. We're not coming in ahead of healthcare. No one cares about transportation at the federal level. That's why we can't raise the gas tax in the first place. If you ask people what their #1 issue is at the local or state level with respect to their election, traffic congestion might show up. No one is thinking about that except maybe a few people in this room or some of the other wonks in Washington. No one is thinking about that with respect to the presidential election. And very few people are thinking about that with respect to their member of Congress or the Senate. No one's voting on the basis of national transportation policy, much less whether they think they're going to get more money for their state. So this idea that the dedicated structure is really working for us, I'm not so sure I buy it. Because the dedicated structure has meant that our existence, our ability to fund transportation adequately in this country is dependent on our ability to raise the gas tax. Well, how well has that worked out? The way that the gas tax has worked is that everybody's terrified to touch it. Obama came in and said immediately to Jim Oberstar, who was the chair of the Transportation Committee in the House, and he said, here's my plan, $450 billion bill, we're going to move ahead with this huge reform in transportation policy. And he said to Jim, no, we're not doing that because I'm not raising the gas tax. Give me 2 years. I refuse to raise the gas tax during a recession. That was his decision. He decided to focus on healthcare, decided to focus on climate change, decided to focus on other things and not transportation. He wasn't spending his political capital on raising the gas tax. And Republicans are even more terrified because we've got Grover Norquist telling them that if they raise taxes on anything that they're going to get excommunicated. So there's no possibility of raising the gas tax, and that is killing the program because we keep clinging to this possibility that maybe next time, maybe next year we'll get a gas tax increase, and then we'll all have so much money and it'll be great. But it's really not going to happen. I mean, there are some, now the talk in Washington as well, there's going to be a debt deal, maybe some of you may have heard of sequestration, and there's going to be a big deal about the debt, and maybe we can slip a gas tax increase in there, because Bowles-Simpson Commission recommended a gas tax increase as part of their deficit reduction plan, so maybe we can do that. Well, maybe you can, but you know what, it's still not going to fix the problem, because we want to have more fuel-efficient cars, and more people are going to continue to ride for more public transit, more people are going to be shifting away from cars. We can't depend on that as a source of revenue anyway. We'd have to shift from that to a vehicle miles traveled fee or some other kind of system, and no one has the political energy to try to do something like that. Ray LaHood, Secretary of Transportation, mentioned that the US DOT was thinking about looking into the idea of a vehicle miles traveled fee. And the White House press secretary immediately said that same day, this is not and will not be the policy of the Obama administration. So they are terrified of that. They're terrified of VMT, they're terrified of gas taxes. They don't seem to be terrified of general funds because they keep doing it. This $20 billion that they just put in was the third general fund bailout, plus there was a ton of general fund money used in the stimulus bill for transportation. It's the way the rest of the world does it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, as you go out into the world and all of you start working for transportation agencies, and they all tell you that no, we have to have a gas tax, we have to have user pay, and we have to have this trust fund, otherwise everyone's going to take away all our money. Think about it for a second. See if they really know what that means and what the actual impact of those trust fund structures are. Maybe you can change their mind. I'm working on it. We'll have some research coming out about this over the next year. And thank you so much for having me here today. It was really a lot of fun. I'm happy to take questions. Yes. Yes, you.
All right, I'll start off. You mentioned we need to incentivize or disincentivize performance measures, but what's to stop then the states from making sure they don't get penalized and just making performance metrics that they know they can make?
Making performance measures that
they know they can make.
Oh, yeah.
Obtainable performance metrics so they don't put their funding at risk.
I think that's a huge problem, and I think it's a federal program, and it is federal money, and the federal government should be setting the performance measures. And instead of allowing states to set targets, as we do under MAP 21, what the federal government should be doing is comparing states and measuring how states are making progress. So in other words, you've just reduced fatalities and injuries by X, other states reduced fatalities and injuries by Y. Well, if X is greater than Y, then you're going to get a little more money. That's one way to do it. I'm not saying that's the only way. The point is that the federal government should be setting the measures, and they should evaluate and monitor progress. You can't leave it to the states to do it themselves.
So you're making an argument that you know that general fund is not necessarily everything. And I agree, I can see your points. But if I'm trying to convince somebody else of the same thing, I understand that you're saying transportation is not really a cost topic, particularly the people who control the general fund. So how do you convince somebody that it's a good idea if it might not become a discussion at all? What's the political argument to say that we will get it?
Well, politically, you gotta remember, it's not a popular idea, but it is what's happening, right? So it's all a question of what's the least popular and what's the most popular solution. So the least of all the alternatives, the least bad of all the alternatives that Congress has had has been to increase the amount of general fund revenues, right? Because Congress is terrified of cutting spending in transportation. The House of Representatives, fully controlled by Republicans, tried to pass a bill that cut the funding by 30%, and it failed. So even the Republicans alone can't do it. So they don't want to cut spending, and they don't want to increase the gas tax. And so the least bad option for them has been, well, let's just put more general fund revenues in. So politically, yeah, it seems like it would be hard, but it's just not as hard as the other things. So it's almost like it will happen by default. It's not even so much you have to convince people, as much as you have to seize the opportunity of, oh look, we're spending more general fund revenues, therefore that money can be better spent. And taking that money and saying, yeah, this is general fund money, so we're not going to have the same stakeholder battles that we had in the past. But I think the other part of it is getting the existing stakeholders to understand that they're going to be okay. Because right now the existing stakeholders are moaning and wailing about the general fund revenues and fighting against it and hurting themselves and clinging to this idea of this gas tax. That's partly what's holding back the real transition that could happen. So I think politically it may actually be the most attractive option. Yes?
You mentioned that the reason it's a 2-year bill, it's a 6-year bill, because of the funding issue of having to pull $20 billion from the general fund. Is there not part of that? I'm hoping our president will get in, so we can change what we want to 2 years.
I think it's less our president will get in and more we'll leave it to the next administration. And it's a different way of looking at it. Because I don't think the Republicans are going to go, I'm going to get in and they'll fix the surface transportation problem. You know, I think either president has an enormous battle to fight with respect to this, and neither of them is likely to take it on. But certainly, there's little evidence that so far that Republicans have the appetite for cutting spending, even though that's what Romney said he would do. And in theory, if Romney were elected and the House and the Senate both went Republican, in theory, you could see cutting spending to align with revenues. That's what would make sense with respect to the Republican platform. But in reality, when a member of Congress comes home to his district and says, hey, I just cut your transportation funding 30%, re-elect me, it doesn't tend to work that well. So even though it might be the fiscally responsible thing to do, it's going to face huge challenges no matter who the president is if they try to go that way. Yes?
So there's been a conversation about the idea of a national infrastructure bank. And you know, it won't be a solution, but do you think it's something that can actually make an impact? And if so, what do you think it looks like? How public, how private?
So there are two different conceptions of what a national infrastructure bank could be, not surprisingly, depending on whether you're in Congress or whether you're the president. The president wants a national infrastructure bank, which means, yeah, we give out loans, but we also give out grant money. Congress wants a national infrastructure bank that is just, we give out loans. Because Congress doesn't want the president having any authority over grant money, and they know that they can't run the infrastructure bank, so the president would have it. So that's why there hasn't been an infrastructure bank. Now, TIFIA, which I described earlier, operates very similar to an infrastructure bank. It's the same kind of concept of giving out loans. And it has been relatively successful, and it's going to be expanded, and that's a good thing, and it has real potential. But the problem with an infrastructure bank is the same problem with the discretionary grant program. The rural states hate it. Rural states hate it because you're going to be funding the investments that have the best return on investment. And those typically are not in places where no one lives. So, for example, you can have a great return on investment for a national infrastructure bank for a toll road that a lot of people are driving around to get to work every day. How many of those are in Montana? Not that many. And the chair of the Finance Committee just happens to be the senator from Montana. He also happens to be the chair of the Subcommittee on Highways and the Environment and Public Works Committee. So he is not going to let that happen. Now these things change, and you know they're fluid, but he's been the primary obstacle to a national infrastructure bank. And most people who care about whether there's loan money available at discount rates feel like that's already been accomplished through TIFIA. So that was a big priority of this administration. It got slammed at every turn, and it's probably not likely to happen. Yes.
Understanding the issues between the formula funding and formula factors, is there not an upside to allowing states to have more control over their allowance? So decreasing the discretionary fund, but also increasing the funds that are going to states that they're not upset with.
Right, so it's a tension because on the one hand, as I started with, I think that the process should be more bottom-up. States and the metropolitan regions should be making the decisions about how they spend the money, and the federal government should only be evaluating the outcomes, not how they spend the money, which is a lot of what they do now. Right now, it's very top-down. It's very much, this money must be spent on X purpose, this money must be spent on X purpose, which is not really relevant. But you have to ask yourself, why do we have a federal program at all? We have a federal program in theory, hopefully, because there are certain goals we want to accomplish through transportation investment that would not be accomplished if the states just did it on their own. And in fact, we just released a report, I encourage you to check it out, called The Consequences of Underinvesting in Transportation. And what this report says is, let's say we cut revenues, or we cut spending to align with revenues. We made that 30% cut. And we spend only what we're taking in gas taxes. How would states react? And the answer is that states would probably be able to replace somewhere around 60% of that money. And the transit authorities would be able to replace very little of that money. And there would be severe cuts to public transportation, and there would be probably some serious deterioration of the highway network. So that's the argument that often was made by strong conservatives, libertarian types of, well, let's just evolve the program. Let the states handle it. They can do it. Why do we need to have the federal government here at all? It's a perfectly legitimate point of view. It just happens to be the case that if you do that, there will be some serious consequences at the moment. You can argue for why that's a good policy. But the alternative, the flip side is, well, okay, so we need a federal program. So what are we trying to accomplish with this federal program? And if you just say, well, we need a federal program, but you just give the money to states and let them do what they want with it, then you may as well not have a federal program. All you're doing is the federal government's acting as the political will of the states. Well, the states won't raise their gas tax. Well, we have some gas tax money, so you can have this. That's not helpful. So if it's federal money, there should be a return on investment with respect to national goals. There are certain goals that the federal government should be in charge of. I would argue reducing our dependence on oil, reducing emissions, improving safety across the network, improving connectivity across the network, and, frankly, improving transportation in metropolitan regions. Because that's where the economics of a country, that's where all the money's generated. That's how we are able to be such a powerful economy. It's because of cities, because of metropolitan regions. So I think there's a federal role in helping all of those things. And if you just give the money to states without any performance measures, through these formula programs, you're not accomplishing those things.
For those states that take advantage of the
Sorry?
for those states that take advantage of the spending.
TIFIA,
Yeah, do we have a national goal or performance measure?
So it's funny you should ask that. There actually were performance measures associated with TIFIA that this administration put in, that they said we're going to give out. It's not going to be just about whether the federal government is likely to get its money back in this loan. It's also going to be about what are we accomplishing? What are the performance measures? And Jim Inhofe did not like that. And they stripped that out. And there are now no performance measures other than, is this a good return on investment? So, no. Yes?
My question goes back to performance measures. My impression that I got before about 21 was that the reason why states want to set their own target is because they feel like policymakers don't recognize the differences in, like a rural state versus an urban state and that kind of thing. So, is there really no chance of policymakers understanding that difference so that when they're setting targets, they bear that in mind? Or how do you sort of advise them as a transportation specialist to bear those things in mind?
Well, of course there are differences among states, and I think that's why the bottom-up approach is what you need to have for these circumstances. I mean, the problem with states setting their own targets is that if the targets are tied to any kind of funding, they're going to be very careful about how they set those targets, right? They're going to make sure that they set them in a way that, and right now they're not even tied to funding, but if they were tied to funding, they would be completely biased in how they set those targets. I think you can account for the differences between states by saying, look, we're all trying to accomplish these national goals. We're all trying to make progress towards these national goals. And whereas one state may do better on one or two goals, another state may do better on another one. Just to give an example, I keep bringing up Montana. It's my favorite rural punching bag. Montana happens, because it's a rural state, has a very high share of fatalities and injuries per capita. More accidents happen on rural roads. They do not have a metropolitan congestion problem. If you look at the performance measures as a spectrum, as a set, and not individually. So in other words, not just saying, well, you guys did great in metropolitan, so here's more money. You guys did great in safety, here's more money. If you look at them as a whole, in a holistic manner, then Montana can compete with New York. Because Montana will be able to do better at the safety measures and maybe in the national connectivity measures, and New York might be able to do better in the metropolitan measures. So you can structure it in a way that's fair when you're having states compete with one another. I think that the states setting their own individual targets thing is just bound to set you up for meaningless performance measures. Yes?
I found your comments about state setting performance measures really interesting because it's been my experience that if there's one level of government that runs faster away from conflict than anyone, it's the federal government. So if there needs to be an enforcement mechanism, what do you see as the incentive for there to be a really fair enforcement of those rules?
That's a really good point. I think it's the federal government does not want to enforce those rules and is very reluctant to enforce them. But I also think that there is a pretty strong distrust of the moment of the ability of government across the board, particularly the federal government, to deliver on anything. And you don't fix that by saying, well, we're going to eliminate government. I mean, that's one way to fix it, is to cut away how much government there is, and that's Grover Norquist's way of fixing it, and there's legitimacy to that. I would argue that if you do that, you're gonna miss out on a lot of these important national goals. So if you're not gonna get rid of the role, then you have to make them accountable. You have to put in accountability. And accountability means accountability across the board. So it means that if you're going to hold the federal government accountable, then you're going to have to hold the states accountable, because the states are the ones who are implementing this. So, you know, it's a question of what's the least bad option. The two options are, we can continue to give money to states with no accountability, or with the limited introduction to accountability that's in MAP 21, or we can try to introduce accountability to the system. I would argue that we're better off going towards trying to introduce accountability, recognizing that it's not going to be easy, recognizing the federal government is going to be terrified of doing it. But I think if we slowly bring states along and move in the direction and show that it's fair, eventually people will buy into it.
Thank you.
Yes?
Maybe we can change the language. Instead of calling it a performance measure, why don't we go for standards? The interstate system is a set of design standards which all states comply with, and they have to do show they can do that in order to get those matching points. So is there some way in which we can set some minimum standard which all states must meet? Now, how you do it is how Montana and New York meet the same standard. That's a technical issue, which a lot of folks in this room can help me with. Is there some way to do it?
Well, I guess the only reason I would, say I prefer the word performance measures to standards is that we're talking a large part of it economics here, right? It's not really engineering. It's economics. It's return on investment from an economic perspective. And if, for safety, you could have a standard, right? For emissions, you could have a standard. For petroleum consumption, you could have a standard. That I get. But when it comes to economic measures, which are really hard, I think you need to have something that is showing more progress, because everybody